Good morning and welcome to this Eurelectric event on the missing piece of the puzzle for the energy transition. We are at a crucial point in time for the energy transition. As a continent, as an economic bloc, we have agreed to move towards a net zero economy by mid-century, and we have decided to pursue historically ambitious goals for 2030. 55% emission reductions, 40% renewable energy, and the list continues. In order to deliver all this, we are facing a unique industrial transformation over the next 10 years. In Eurelectric, we call it the electric decade because we need to ramp up the size of our sector. We need to progressively electrify end-use sectors, and this will require trillions of euros in investments. Now, investors will only put their money in our sector if they have a confidence that they're going to get a return on their investments. And this is exactly what we're discussing here today. This is also what leaders are going to discuss in 2 days from now at the European Council, because we are facing a regular crisis. We're seeing energy prices surge. We're seeing people react to it, and we're seeing governments, in some cases, do meaningful things, in some cases do detrimental things that undermine investor confidence. If leaders continue with oops measures, continue with individual interventions in the market that are distortive and undermine confidence, ultimately the Green Deal will be delayed or even derailed. So it is critical that we get the long-term investment signals right. But let's leave the bigger political situation to the side for the moment. What we want to focus on today in this event is the investment signals for the grids, the tariffs. How do we structure tariffs to ensure progressive electrification and to ensure a modernization of our distribution grids that will allow for us to reinforce these grids to handle more electric cars, more heat pumps, more renewable energy, and a more extreme weather situation, because we know that even if we address climate change here and now, we will be seeing some adverse effects of a changing climate. So how to structure the tariffs for an accelerated energy transition, that is the topic of today's event. We have a report fresh from the press that has been developed by the experts in Eurelectric. We have more than 700 people registered for this event. So I really look forward to the discussion. And without further ado, let me hand over the word to Paul Wilczek, who is the head of distribution in Eurelectric. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Christian, very much for this kind introduction. My name is Paul Wilczek. I'm heading the distribution and market facilitation team at Eurelectric, and welcome also from my side to this event this morning. We are launching an exciting project, an exciting report this morning to answer and elaborate on this question: are efficient network tariffs the missing piece in the energy transition? This is quite a first-mover study that elaborates on this question from a holistic perspective, as we are representing the entire value chain at Eurelectric. So I'm really excited about this, and also looking with pleasure at the panel discussion coming up now as well. But first of all, I would like to give the floor to our project leader, Juan José Alba Ríos. Juan José is Vice President, Regulatory Affairs in the Spanish utility Endesa, and he was our project manager and led the drafting team of experts in this work. Yes, we're going to hear now the key results and deliberations of this report. So without any further ado, Juan, I'm really pleased to give you the floor, and please go ahead. Thank you, Juan.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us in sharing the results of this report on network tariff. We have been working on network tariffs because we think that electricity grids are key for the decarbonization process. The cost of the grid is obviously a relevant part of the cost of the system, and then having an efficient grid is key to having an efficient energy transition. Pricing the grid services in the right way will be critical to ensure that the grid is providing good value to everybody who is connected to it. The whole structure of expertise of Eurelectric has contributed to this analysis through a horizontal drafting team with representatives from DSOs, retailers, generations, and other areas of our organization. We try to provide a balance between the traditional tariff principles, cost recovery, cost reflection, non-discrimination, and economic signals that are good for driving electrification and driving an efficient use of network services. Network tariffs work together with energy prices, with the market-based energy prices. The two things working together should incentivize an efficient use of the grid and should allow for non-distorted access to the market. Tariff design must be adjusted to the energy transition. Technology nowadays provides a lot of information about consumers and gives consumers the opportunity to react to prices. We are also in a world in which electricity is not alone. Electricity is now competing with other energy carriers. We have the challenge of providing the right economic signal to new uses of electricity, things that were not with us a few years ago, such as self-generation, energy communities, electric vehicle, heat pumps, storage, etc. For this, the key is to have cost-reflective network tariffs. Cost-reflective network tariffs working together with well-functioning markets will provide a sustainable and an efficient electricity system, will facilitate electrification. This interaction between the grid tariffs and the retail prices and the energy prices requires the supplier to have some flexibility on how to include the network grid incentive into its retail price by offering the appropriate products and services to the customers. The energy transition will no doubt require adapting and modifying our existing tariffs. It is key to have the involvement not only of DSOs, but of all market parties in this process. Even though the design of the tariff or the approval of the tariff will be the responsibility of the regulator, the involvement of the whole society that is using the electricity grid is fundamental. Network tariffs must be cost reflective. This means that they have to be in line with the structure of the costs, especially the structure of incremental costs. And the structure of incremental costs of the networks happen to be very much capacity related. So network tariffs with significant capacity charges are more in line with the structure of costs. Time differentiated tariffs provide different prices in different moments of the day or the week. They improve cost reflectiveness. They provide better price signals than flat tariffs that charge the same price in every moment. They could help reducing losses. They could help deferring investment costs because they can help users to make a better utilization of the network. They can also promote innovation because those are economic signals that the retailers can play with to offer interesting and useful products. They can help demand response. They can facilitate electrification because they are a promising cost-reflective solution for new uses, avoiding the development of specific tariffs. So we think that the right combination is to have time differentiated network tariffs that are static, that is, that they use the same predefined time periods, together with flexibility markets, because flexibility markets allow taking the full advantage of the flexibility that the users of the network can provide. Dynamic time of use tariffs, on the other hand, are too complex for DSOs, for retailers, and for customers alike. Maybe in the future, the system will evolve in that direction, but for the time being, their benefits are unproven and the implementation is really unproven. Obviously, a time-differentiated tariff requires a proper framework in terms of smart metering and access to data. Changes in network tariff must have visibility. They must be well publicized in advance, so customers will have full information when making investment decisions. Time-differentiated tariffs are not a modern invention. They have been used in a number of countries. France has particular experience in using this kind of product. There is a time-differentiated low-voltage tariff in France, even with different time periods for different feeders, for different parts of the distribution network, that allows the DSOs and now the retailer to send a signal to the customer that controls the water heater and help the system move the peak load to make sure that not all the peak loads of the system happen at the same time. In France, they have been also using critical peak pricing, in which the TSO can identify certain days as being critical because of the situation of generation and demand, and define specific prices with higher discrimination for those days, using a code of colors, red, black and blue. Probably the most ambitious implementation of changes in network tariff design happened in Spain this summer. This summer, the Spanish regulator introduced a time-differentiated tariff with time differentiation both in the energy charge and the capacity charge, with 3 time periods in the energy charge and 2 time periods in the capacity charge, and with charges that are very different, very high in peak hours and very low in off-peak hours. What does that mean? It means, for instance, that a user that wants to buy an electric vehicle and wants to charge the electric vehicle in off-peak hours can contract a lot of capacity during those hours at a very, very low price, almost zero, because in those moments, the network has a lot of unused capacity. Therefore, the incremental cost of charging the car in those moments is extremely low. If we look at the impact of a tariff like this in day-to-day uses, such as a dishwasher or washing machine, we can see that the economic impact is relatively small. Between using the washing machine every day in the peak hours or using it every day in the off-peak hour, we have a difference of between 50 euros per year when we are using the washing machine in the peak hours, 17 euros per year when we are using it in off-peak hours. So it's not a big thing. A tariff like this has a positive economic impact that there is a lot of off-peak hours. The vast majority of the year are off-peak hours, not only the night, but also the weekends and holidays. But the point here is that this kind of economic signal is probably more relevant for retailers, aggregators, energy service companies than for the customer itself. The customer can save 2, 3, 4, 10 euros by changing behavior. But the retailer can make a lot of money by providing the right economic signal to the user and saving the payment of those amounts of grid tariffs for all the customers. That's why this interaction between the retail products and the grid tariffs is something very relevant, and this flexibility on the hands of the retailer is something very relevant. The introduction of the tariff in Spain also shows the consequences of doing something like this very fast without sufficient information. There have been a lot of controversy in the social network, with people joking about the need to put the washing machine at 3 a.m. or people joking and comparing the situation of the tariffs with a bar that is charging different prices for a beer or a coffee depending on the time of the day. Certainly, things have been taken out of context, And it happens as well that in Spain we have had the introduction of these new tariffs precisely in the moment in which we were going through this turmoil in the energy prices, very high prices in the wholesale markets, etc. And this has created a lot of confusion with many people thinking that the change on the grid tariffs was responsible for the high prices that they were seeing in the market. We've also been looking at things that shouldn't be in the tariff. We have always complained of taxes and levies that can mean a very significant amount of the bill that is paid by an end customer, especially domestic customers. These costs that are not directly related to the electricity supply penalize the use of electricity, create a barrier to electrification. We have also looked at energy poverty. There is a temptation of dealing with energy poverty by introducing specific tariffs or discounts in the network tariffs. We don't think that is a good idea. Energy poverty should be dealt with as social policy through the state budget and not by introducing exemption or changes in grid tariffs. In general, we think, and this is an important message of our document, that network tariffs must be sustainable and cost-reflective. And this is not compatible with being used as support tools of energy policy. We should not use grid tariffs to kick-start technologies or to kick-start new policies. We should make sure that network tariffs are sustainable and cost-reflective. However, exemptions happen, and countries, member states, are introducing exemptions to these principles and are creating ad hoc specific tariffs for certain uses. If this happens, it is important that these exemptions are temporary and are accompanied by a clear phase-out roadmap. Regarding taxes and levies, we have examples of countries that have been dealing with that. France already took the decision of move a part of the cost that was included in the electricity bill into general taxation and into the state budget. Spain is also dealing with a similar proposal that is now in Parliament of a scheme for sharing part of the cost linked to these levies by all the energy carriers, not only electricity, as has been the case until now, but also oil and gas consumers. One of the most controversial topics in the report has been the application of grid tariffs to generation. In the past, traditionally, Eurelectric has been against the application of transmission tariffs to generation, basically because we think that this can create distortions in the wholesale and retail markets. However, things are more complicated in a world in which distributed generation is everywhere and the limit between generators and consumers is no longer clear. The same entity can be both a generator and a consumer, maybe in different times. So we need to deal with the allocation of network costs to generators, and we think that the best way of doing that is by assessing it together with connection charges and flexibility markets, because we think that connection charges and flexibility markets are the best way to give price signals to generators. We also think that a well-designed network tariff should result in a small fraction of the cost being imposed on generators if generators behave reasonably. This does not mean that we are asking for an exemption of the application of grid tariffs to generators. But what we say is that a well-designed tariff, when efficiently applied, should result in low cost being paid by generators that are behaving reasonably. This makes sense. At the end of the day, in very simplistic terms, what I want to do with the tariff is to move consumers away from the peak hours and to attract generators into the peak hours, into the moments in which the network is more heavily loaded. Something similar happens with storage. Storage is not developing at the pace that we would like, possibly because of the lack of adequate market signals and because of distortions caused by tariffs and by taxes. So again, we need a detailed assessment of the cost that different business models of storage impose on the network, and we need to assess the allocation of network cost to storage together with connection charges and with flexibility markets. Only a cost-effective tariff that allocates cost of the network efficiently to storage will incentivize an appropriate and efficient development of storage. We have looked at the impact of network tariffs on EV charging. A time-differentiated tariff adapts very well to electric vehicle charging at home because users can choose to charge the car in off-peak hour at a very, very low cost. Because of that, they work very well without any kind of a specific tariff design for that use. But public chargers are a different story. Public chargers have low utilization for the time being, and they do not benefit from the time discrimination because most of the time they are used in peak hours. So some countries have introduced specific network tariffs for public chargers with higher energy charge and with lower capacity charge. In general, as the use of public chargers increases, this would gradually become unnecessary, and these tariffs would naturally be abandoned. In practice, some countries have introduced these exemptions, and it is in any case important to keep them monitored and to introduce a phase-out plan to make sure that exemptions are temporary. Electrolyzers face a similar situation. The cost of electricity supply is a very important part of the cost of an electrolyzer, and the cost of the grid is a big part of that. So the temptation to promote electrolyzers by introducing exemptions in network tariffs is important. This would be not cost reflective, and these exemptions would be unsustainable as electrolyzers grow and represent a significant amount of the demand. So obviously, we don't think that this is an efficient solution. But if those exemptions are introduced, again, they should be carefully monitored and should be accompanied by a plan for its gradual removal. We have an example of the impact of a time-differentiated tariff, such as the one that has been introduced in Spain, in private EV charging. We can see how the tariff that has been implemented in Spain, that is not a specific tariff for EV charging, is the normal time-differentiated tariff that applies to all households, will drive the cost of private charging down by 92%, from 192 euros per year in a given scenario to 16.2 euros per year, considering only the grid costs. For public charging, the impact is not that big, because for public charging, the problem is not the time differentiation, the problem is the level of use of the public charger. And then even with the new tariff, the impact of the tariff continues being relevant in the cost of the charging in a public station, but will become much less relevant when the use of these public stations becomes significant, let's say beyond 1,000 hours. Finally, we present in the report, among many other examples of different do's and don'ts in terms of tariff design, the case of renewable energy communities in Italy. Users that share a number of facilities, such as PV facilities, that can exchange electricity across the public network and can exchange electricity with the public network. The Italian grid tariffs introduces not only some kind of incentives for the development of renewables, but also some kind of appropriate treatment of the grid tariff to take into account of the benefits that this kind of configuration brings to the system in terms of reduction of losses, etc. This is one of many different examples of positive and negative things that can happen with grid tariffs that are developed in our report. Thank you very much.
Juan, thank you very much for this clear and very interesting presentation. The report is launched today. You can download it on our website. So please feel free to do so. It's certainly a very worthwhile read. Maybe one follow-up question before we go to ACER, the energy regulators. Juan, in the work when you did the report, if you had to choose, which key messages would you say, as the most important one, if you can say that resounded clearly in the work of the drafting team?
I would probably highlight two messages from the report. Message number one is that since we want a tariff that is cost reflective, that is efficient, and that is sustainable, that is incompatible with having ad hoc tariffs for different uses. We cannot use the grid tariffs as a tool to support different technologies or different policy decisions. We need efficient tariffs that apply to all the users of the network in the same time. Second message is that we need to avoid complexity. We need to be very careful with the introduction of new tariffs, for instance. We have to learn from the experience in Spain, for instance, that the process of introducing a new tariff must be much more well thought. And we don't want very complex things, such as dynamic time of use tariffs that have time periods that can change depending on the conditions of the network. Static time of use tariffs provide good enough signals, and when combined with flexibility markets, we can use this combination to deal with network congestion wherever it is needed, and we can have a system or a solution that is reasonably simple and reasonably easy to implement.
Good. I would like to introduce now Christophe Jean-Screux, head of the electricity department at ACER, the agency for the cooperation of energy regulators placed in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Christophe, you make some reference here to the work that ACER is doing in the domain of tariffs. Notably, you're now obliged to publish every 2 years a report on transmission and distribution tariff methodologies. So I would be happy to hear your views on how your work relates to the results of this report that were just presented by Juan. Please, Christophe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And congratulations to Juan José and Eurelectric for this very clear and comprehensive report. As you know, network tariff is still a relatively new topic for ACER. We started only 2 years ago to work on this issue. And it's good to see that with this report that we have now some allies to help us identify some best practice in Europe. So for sure, this is an important topic which can contribute to a successful energy transition. Even though I would not necessarily qualify this topic as the missing piece. 1 year ago, we ran a stakeholder survey to identify the main barriers to efficient price formation, the main barriers to market entry for new and small market players. And the lack of transparency, the lack of cost reflectiveness, the lack of non-discrimination in the network tariff was not necessarily the main barrier identified by stakeholders. My intervention will be divided in 3 parts. I will start by reminding the importance of network tariff of this topic. Then I will describe the role of ACER in this area, and then I will conclude with a brief comparison of the 2 reports. So let's start with the first topic. Why is this network tariff an important topic? First, because electricity network form the backbone of the local and European energy system, and they are key assets for enabling a cost-effective decarbonization. Also because with the ambitious EU energy policy and climate goals, vast investment are expected in the network to manage the increasing electricity needs, to accommodate the renewable generation, and to meet the flexibility challenge, which means that those network codes are expected to increase in the future. And also because this charge constitutes a considerable cost for the network users in several countries in Europe. On average, they represent 1/3 of the final bill for customers. So the core objective of the network tariff is to recover the system operation cost in the most efficient way. And another objective is also to properly design them such that they can deliver on top of the energy prices economic signal to those to the network users to adapt their behavior, and as such mitigate the overall network and system cost, with the caveat that the effectiveness of such signals depends on multiple factors. The design of electricity network tariff is a very complex task, and NRS shall pursue the various tariff setting principles beyond the cost reflectivity, such as non-discrimination, transparency, simplicity, stability, predictability, and sustainability. In practice, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to meet all these principles simultaneously, and regulators have to make certain trade-offs to find the right balance. So needless to say that the one-size-fits-all principle does not really apply to electricity network tariffs. And this complexity in the tariff design increases even more with the rapidly evolving energy system, featured by increased integration of renewable, increased electrification, and the apparition of new and more active network users in the system. We are of the view that the task of designing and setting this network tariff shall be the exclusive competence of NRS in order to ensure that the tariff methodology are free, or at least as free as possible, from any political or commercial interest. Now I will move to the second part. What is the role of Acer in this area? So first, just to remind that contrary to the gas sector, a network code on electricity network tariff was taken off the table by the legislators, at least for the time being. And maybe this is partly due to the difficulty to apply the one-size-fits-all in this area. Instead, Acer has been assigned by the Clean Energy Package has been assigned the task to provide and update at least every 2 years a best practice report on transmission and distribution tariff methodology, and while taking into account national specificities. According to the EU legislation, NRS shall duly take that best practice report into consideration when fixing or approving distribution tariff or their methodology. The Acer tariff report should contribute to increasing transparency and comparability in tariff setting. In 2019 and 20, Acer carried out a first holistic review of the transmission and distribution tariff structure across the EU member state and published its results on its website. During this work, Acer observed a fragmented understanding of the terms distribution and transmission tariffs, and a wide variety of national practices with regard to the tariff structures and their elaboration. In other words, the first finding of our review was that we don't seem to speak the same language when it comes to tariff structures. Therefore, Acer deemed it important that when setting or approving the tariff methodology, NRS clearly differentiate distribution and transmission tariff from other regulated tariffs paid by the network users, such as tariffs for metering services, tariff for purchasing system services. Additionally, within the network tariffs, NRS should be able to differentiate at least between the tariff element, which cover only costs for the building, upgrading, and maintaining the infrastructure, and the tariff element which cover the network losses where such costs accrue to the system operators. So the review of the national practices in Europe was the first step for us, and we came up with some high-level, no-regret recommendation, focusing on the importance of transparency, stakeholder involvement, and predictability in the network tariff. We hope that with a bit more time and maybe resources, we will be, and also in coordination with stakeholders, we will be able to go into more details, and that we will be able to make more specific recommendation moving forward. Now I will come to the last part of my intervention, to which extent the two reports align with Eurelectric's one. And here I will, to manage the suspense, I will say that we are broadly, to a very large extent, aligned with the recommendation made in Eurelectric's report. Among the main point of alignment, I could mention that the fact that we agree with Eurelectric that cost reflectivity is a key issue when designing network tariffs, and in order to avoid market distortion, the cost caused by a network user should be properly reflected in its network tariff. ACER also agrees that taxes, levies, or other payment for non-DSO costs should not be covered by tariff, as these costs are unrelated to the building, maintenance, or operation of the network, and may even create distortions in its efficient system use. ACER also supports the increasingly power-based tariffs to recover those costs, which show correlation with contracted or peak capacity. However, we would just like to remind that this would imply a higher complexity and can have a negative impact on the simplicity and predictability and transparency of the network tariff. As Eurelectric, ACER recommends that exemption or discounts from the payment of the reflective cost by a network user are provided only if justified reasons exist and only for a temporary period. The necessity of different treatment should be carefully considered and reassessed over time by the NRAs. ACER notes that with the introduction of distributed generation, increasing demand and capability of some resources to respond to time signals, time of use tariff will have an important role to play in the near future. While care should be given to the potentially conflicting time signals given by the energy prices, static time of use tariffs, especially for large consumers, can be a useful tool for reducing system peak load, which is the main driver for network investment. We have also identified, it's not some differences, but some aspects in Eurelectric reports which, in our view, will need further consideration. For example, regarding injection charges, ACER is not advising for their termination or minimization, but for the careful consideration of their cost impact and avoiding any discrimination between network users. We believe that this injection charges could be an additional tool to provide price signals regarding the location and operation on top of the connection charges and flexibility market that were mentioned in Eurelectric's report. Regarding storage, we seem to agree that if a network user both withdraws from and injects into the grid, both should be considered when setting distribution tariffs by properly taking into account the potential cost offsetting effect and the overall cost on the network. It's also true that we observe very different practices in Europe in that respect, but we do not have the data on the cost impact at local level, which could be positive, negative, or null. So we cannot conclude at this stage on whether some of these national practices have a distorting effect or not. We will need a bit more time and maybe more resources as well for that. Also, ACER cannot either, or at least not yet, conclude that the current network tariff designs are not appropriate or that they must be adjusted to the energy transition per se. We call attention in our report to the challenges ahead, but there is a huge variety of different tariff structures, and some may already provide more future-proof solution than others. So for the time being, we focus again on some high-level recommendation, no regret solution, and we expect in the future to have more tailor-made tariff practices in our report. Finally, the ACER report did not discuss yet bundle tariff, i.e. the fact that suppliers could decide on how to include the network tariff in the retail price. I think on this issue, we believe that it's important that NRS keeps some control on this issue, because they are the best place to find the right balance between the tariff setting principle and the appropriateness of the suitability of the price signal for the network users. So in this regard, leaving this issue up to the supplier, how to include tariff signal for network users needs to be carefully considered. All in all, ACER again very much welcome this Eurelectric study on network tariff, and consider this report as a very useful stakeholder input to our work in this area. I see it as very important to continue this dialogue with you, with all stakeholders, to define best practices in Europe in terms of tariff setting. And of course, I'm looking forward to hearing panelists and stakeholder views during this webinar. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your clearly structured intervention here. Yeah, well, it sounds like there's some broad alignment between your work and your report and what our key messages are in the tariffs report we just launched. However, there's of course some details that we should discuss, and also a lot about the hows of tariff modification and tariff evolution. But now, without any further ado, I would like to move on to the panel discussion. And here I'm very much looking forward to our panelists. Firstly, we might start with the policymaker perspective at European level. And I'm pleased here to welcome Elaine O'Connell from the European Commission. Elaine is working as policy officer in DG Energy, in the unit that deals with tariff design effectively, and joining us from Brussels today. So Elaine, maybe looking at European legislation to start with, and here I'm looking in particular, of course, at the clean energy package that was basically the most recent legislation that looked and regulated tariffs at European level. Can you say here a few words at what is the European Commission doing on tariffs, and also reflecting on perhaps Christoph's remarks about tariffs should be designed exclusively at national regulation level. What can we actually then add at European level to this debate, while being respectful of the differing challenges in each country itself?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here today, and I just want to first of all say thank you very much for having me. I think this has been a very useful piece of work conducted by Eurelectric, and I think the detail and best practice and examples are very, very helpful. I think maybe the first point to make is that is also to repeat something that Christoph said. It's very difficult to find a one-size-fits-all solution that will fit the specificities of each of the 27 member states. So at EU level, this is why the EU rules on this are generally quite limited to the principles set out in Article 18 of the electricity regulation. They require things like cost reflectivity, transparency, non-discrimination, and the facilitation of innovation. But maybe there are two elements that I would like to discuss that were really quite a lot in the debate around the time of the negotiations on the clean energy package, and really trying to shine a light on what can be done at European level. So the first element is around distribution tariffs. So I think this is very important, because at the time of the Commission's impact assessment, we found that around 60 to 90% of new variable generation was being connected at the distribution level. And I think this is a huge shift, and it demonstrates the changes that we're seeing in our electricity system, and also the increasing importance of distribution connected generation and the need for a more active role for DSOs. And this is also why it's so important now that that there is this principle in Article 18 as well, that there should not be discrimination between production connected at the distribution level and at the transmission level. So I think the increasing role of distribution and the whole distribution level is very important here. And we do see that reflected in the EU legislation. And then the second element is something that we've already talked about, because although we know it's difficult to have a one-size-fits-all approach, what we can do at EU level is to facilitate knowledge sharing, best practice sharing, and finding ways of working together to find good approaches to the tariff question. So as we know, all NRAs face the challenge of balancing many objectives in the tariff design. But many of these are common issues: how to make the distribution network more flexible, how to incentivize use of the grid at off-peak times, how to ensure that the electrification of the economy, such as the rollout of EVs, can be well managed. And I think as a result now, with the regular best practice reports from ACER on transmission and distribution methodologies, this is going to be very helpful. And it's my hope that this ongoing reporting process with ACER will become a type of a forum for thought leadership and knowledge sharing amongst NRAs, something that didn't exist before, even though the topic is so important. And it ends up taking up to about 1/3 of the consumer electricity bill in Europe. So it's very important for consumers. And this is also why I find this work by Eurelectric very useful and very, very timely. And I think the more work we have that can feed into this ongoing debate can only be useful. And the more we understand what others are doing, and the more we can learn lessons from that, will be for the better, of all consumers.
With regards to the shift you are mentioning, more and more generation is indeed being connected at distribution level. I have seen that if we are meeting our targets at European level as well, up to 2030, about half of our generation fleet will be connected at distribution level by then. So indeed quite a shift here. Thanks a lot for your views. Maybe let's move on here to the different system users and industries. Firstly, maybe here to Christopher Burkhardt. Christopher, you are president of Charge Up Europe. It's the association at European level representing EV charging infrastructure. And you are also the managing director of the company ChargePoint. So a lot has been said already about your industry, about EV charging. And yeah, let's hear from you. What do you see as the biggest challenges for the deployment of charge points across Europe from the perspective of network tariffs and fees? What challenges are you facing? And also, well, we have some targets here in the Fit for 55 package that are basically EV charging infrastructure targets. Where do you see here the threats and opportunities?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think, first of all, it's important to say that driving an electric vehicle is something that consumers are getting to grips with at the moment. We've seen huge growth in electric vehicle penetration, and obviously part of the attractiveness is also in the operation of that vehicle, and obviously electricity pricing plays a key role, as well as not just pricing, also the transparency of that pricing and the stability of that pricing. I think there's also a potential that should be embraced in this debate that electric vehicles can bring to grid stability and to flexibility in terms of charging vehicles as vehicle-to-grid technology comes to market. You asked a little bit around sort of how we see charging infrastructure development, and I think one of the things we have in Europe at the moment is a lot of concentration of public charging infrastructure in a few markets like the Netherlands, like Germany, like France. And obviously one of the objectives of Charge Up Europe as part of the Fit for 55 package, and especially as part of the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation review, is to ensure that we can boost infrastructure across member states. That rollout, in our opinion, should be tied to minimum infrastructure targets that are linked to fleet size, We will actually come out in the next few weeks with a proposal as to how that should be done and how you can do so dynamically, so that as the fleet grows, infrastructure grows with the fleets. The key thing to say at the moment is that the targets that have been proposed so far are quite weak. They would actually only lead to the increase in infrastructure in one member state. So our proposal is going to be pretty ambitious in terms of improving that. So I think both the rollout and then obviously the way that pricing is managed in a transparent and stable manner to the consumer is going to be key in the rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. For this, I was just saying it's really interesting to hear also that the targets for EV infrastructure as put forward around the Fit for 55 package are indeed perhaps not so ambitious as many might think. Interesting stuff in any case. Now let me move on to the next industry user, Michele Pisarello, who is representing today EASE, the Energy Association of Storage. Michele, you are coming from NLX and being the head there of new markets and business development. You are chairing at EASE the Applications and Economics group. How do you see then, networks tariffs associated with storage evolving over time? And what are your particular challenges with regards to tariffs in light of the report results and also ACER's and European Commission's perspectives?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity of participating to this very interesting panel. So in a couple of words, it's definitely getting better in terms of network tariffs and design related and associated to storage. If I think of where we were 10 years ago, nobody really knew how to treat this new kind of asset in terms of is it a generator, is it a load, how do we charge it? And this ended up in tariff frameworks which weren't really favorable for energy storage. On the front of the meter solution, so the big utility scale systems, we had many countries applying double charges, which definitely weren't allowing the front of the meter solutions to be competitive in giving services to the grid. And on the other hand, for the behind the meter solutions, we had flat tariffs, which were really not able to allow the storage systems on the behind the meter premises to give additional value to our customers, to the end users. So things definitely have changed since then. We've seen many countries like UK, Ireland removing the double charges, which has been a good boost for the development of the front of the meter in those countries. And on the other hand, we're seeing, as Juan Jose showed us in his previous intervention, very interesting new tariff designs that are allowing battery storage solutions on the BTM side to extract more value. So we're seeing time of use tariff in Spain, for example. We've seen energy communities development in Italy. So we're really looking into good applications for storage, both on the front of the meter and on the behind the meter premises. So this is a good signal. In terms of the challenges that we see on this tariff design, well, the challenges are still the ones that we had in the past. So these good signals in a couple of member states have to be deployed and developed in other countries. This is fundamental. Both for what relates on the tariff design, on the chargers, but also on the energy community designs and on the possibility to aggregate on a low voltage side, the generation and the consumption. What else? I think that in terms of big challenges, there is a specific need for the industry, which is the one to have let's say, long-term stability on the tariff design that we are changing and designing now. So it's good to think about new designs. It's definitely going to help the storage business. On the other hand, the signal has to be the new tariffs are going to remain like this for some time, or we have to give signals that this is the right path, because otherwise, since storage is a cost-intensive kind of application, not giving a long-term visibility on what will be the tariff design could in some way slow down the development of storage. Another point, the last one, then I give it back to you. It's related to the need of a standardization in some way. I understand the complexity. We understand the complexity of standardizing grid tariff design throughout countries in Europe, but at the same time, it would definitely be a way to boost and let's say help the industry to develop this kind of solutions.
Michele, that's clear messages from the storage industry. Now our, last panelist from, representing an industry segment is Bram van der Waal, representing SmartN, the European Association integrating consumer-driven solutions of the energy transition. I suppose you represent a lot of the aggregators as well. You are Chief Product Officer of the company Net2Grid. How would you, Bram, describe then the customer experience of today with regards to tariffs, and how you do see that changing actually over the coming years with increased digitalization, automation, and also the trends that we see in terms of flexibility and flexibility procurement at distribution grid level? Would be interesting to hear your views there and how this reflects with the report findings we just heard.
Yes, thank you for having me, and good morning to everybody. If we talk about consumers, our company and our group of SmartN, we do see that there is an interest, a bigger interest in energy in general, but energy as a topic is still a non-of-interest product, right? So the need for specific tariffs for end users, I do agree that it is very difficult to have people manage their behavior based on tariffs. We have some examples in Germany with one of our customers where time of use tariffs in the form of a happy hour is used as a marketing tool to obtain people as a way to keep people interested in the company as such, that they get something back for it. But the use of energy tariffs to help people adjust their consumption behavior is a difficult topic for most end users. What we do recognize is that there is an interest of cost reduction. And also with our customers at Net2Grid, we see that energy retailers, they want to move away from commodity selling to energy as a service business models. And there is a contradicting item in the reporting that static time of use tariffs as a solution, we see that as an intermediate step towards a full flexibility market, which is required for offering energy as a service solutions. So for us, the current state of the report is still very conservative, and we do see an acceleration of the uptake of EV cars. We see that houses that have an EV car charging within 3 months, with 10% of the households, they also start installing solar panels. So it's not only that one aspect or one group of energy consumption is increasing, we see that it accelerates per household. So at Net2Grid, we have a technology developed that we can look behind the meter what's actually happening in energy consumption and energy production measures. And we do see a rapid change in the appliances and also the loads that are very dynamic. And that's for us a concern, that what is not being able to be measured cannot be managed. That's sort of a statement that we use for also the question of obtaining more granular data, for instance, in a more real-time fashion, so that also real-time steering of assets can take place from an aggregator perspective. So these are sort of the consumer items. On the other side, we also see that there's a request for DSOs to be able to look behind the meter for storage capacity. We think that's a little bit, let's say, not in the interest of privacy for end users. So therefore, we would say that DSOs themselves should not have access to behind-the-meter insights. That should be with energy retailers and aggregators to be the middle person to help balance the grid, because that's in the end what we would like to avoid, right? We want to avoid grid expansion and grid investments. And therefore, we believe that more dynamic tariffs combined with time of use tariffs is the way forward in this energy transition, moving in the energy residential space towards energy as a service propositions.
Thank you very much, Bram, for these first thoughts. Before closing the loop, then this first loop of discussion items with the panelists with Christoph from ASA, back to you, Juan. What would you be your first reactions to what you just heard? Any responses that we can find in the report on this? I just noted here quite some interesting statements on storage, for example. There seems to be some data missing as well. Is there something that we faced in our work on storage, if distortions persist in this regard? And also on what Bram just said, static terms of use tariffs. Is this, is this the end of the road? Are we being too conservative in our report on that? So your thoughts here, Juan.
There have been many things that have been said. This one about the dynamic time of use tariffs was the last thing mentioned, and I will start with that. Certainly, we believe that we need to find the right balance between complexity and efficiency and, let's say, efficiency of the economic signals. We think that certainly time discrimination is relevant and provides value and improves the tariff. Static time discrimination, we find, is enough when combined with flexibility markets. So certainly static time of use tariffs are not enough because obviously they cannot react to the reality of the network. But flexibility markets can. Flexibility markets can be implemented in those areas of the network where there are really needs or opportunities for this, or they could be implemented everywhere in the network when that is appropriate. And flexibility markets allow the participation of those who are interested in delivering, in participating in them. So we think that for the moment, the balance between a static time of use tariff plus flexibility markets makes possible to offer a manageable degree of complexity to everyone. Something that has been said as well about storage. Certainly, we also say we have been working with limited data in our report, and certainly we say in the report that we need to make a more in-depth analysis of the influence of different business models of storage activities on the network cost, and we need better data to understand better what is going on regarding storage. I don't recall right now other key elements that have been mentioned by some of the other panelists.
Yeah, that's fine. I think one important or one interesting element was by also Christoph from ASA to say, tariffs shall be exclusively conceived by the energy regulators as one of the recommendations of the report. We are not very vocal about this in our report, are we? What are your views on this?
No, yes, and there was something else that was said by a couple of the panelists that I wanted to comment on. So I will continue with that. First of all, we think that obviously tariffs must be set by the regulator, but we need this process to be public enough, and we need to involve in the discussion and in the consultation retailers, consumers, etc. Because we cannot just set tariffs from the point of view of cost recovery. We need to take all kind of points of view into account. Also, there was a comment from Christophe Janskreux regarding the flexibility of the retailer, and some other comments by some other panelists about the ability of customers to change their behavior or not. Those are topics that have been discussed intensively during our work. So certainly the purpose of the tariff is not to change the behavior of customers. There are behaviors that can be adapted, and there are behaviors that will not be adapted. If I want to have dinner at 8 p.m., I will have to cook dinner shortly before that, and I am not going to cook my dinner at 3 a.m. because that wouldn't make any sense. So certainly the point of the tariff is to give you the right economic signal so that you pay for the cost that you are imposing on the grid. And then you can decide whether you continue to do things in the same way or if you can adapt. Second point is that this adaptation, most of the time, will not be done by the customer alone. Let's say, in general, as was shown in some of the examples that I presented, the economic signal of the tariff is too weak for the customer to do things that are expensive or cumbersome for him. So what we need is to automate things. So we need energy service providers, we need retailers, we need aggregators to deliver the products that will help the customers to act in an optimum way, to adapt when they can and to pay when they have to. So in general, we cannot expect the customers to pay attention to the time period, to pay attention to when the tariff is high and low. We want these kind of things to be automatic, and we want retailers, energy service providers, and aggregators to deliver the devices, the software, and the products that will make those decisions easy for the customers. Another point that was made by Christophe had to do with the flexibility of the retailers to pass the tariff to the customers. Certainly, retailers offer a variety of products. You have products offered by retailers in some countries in which you pay a fixed amount per month for all your energy use. So obliging the retailer to directly pass through the grid tariff to the customer not always makes sense. In general, the retailer will have to pay the tariff, the retailer will have to bear that cost, but he can choose how to pass it through to the customer. Maybe as it is, maybe with a different kind of incentive, maybe with some product that will control some of the appliances of the customer. So there will be a variety of things that the retailer can do to transmit those signals to the customer. So what we believe is that the tariffs start providing economic signals that in most cases are more relevant for the retailer or the aggregator or the energy service provider than to the customer, him or herself, but that can be used by those entities to deliver new products and services and to help the customer navigate all this complexity of the tariffs.
Thanks a lot, Juan. I think here we are closing the loop then with Christophe and your views, of course, of what you just heard, not only from Juan as a response to your longer intervention at the start that you had, but also to the other panelists. I'd be in particular interested in hearing from you. You said as a recommendation it should be, of course, conceived by the regulators, any tariff design reforms, etc. And it's taking place. We agree in principle on that. But how do you then ensure the sort of complex stakeholder interaction that we are facing nowadays, and that we need to ensure there are stakeholder interactions foreseen if we write a network code, for example. It can't be done by NSOE and the EU DSO entity on their own. There are formalized stakeholder involvement possibilities. But if you do this only at national level by the national regulators, what are your thoughts there? How do we ensure this transparency and stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, this was indeed mentioned by a couple of panelists, in particular Michele and Juan, the importance of transparency and effective stakeholder involvement. So this is indeed of paramount importance, and the experience, the Spanish experience, the recent Spanish experience is here to prove that the importance. I confirm that we see an important role for NRS in this tariff setting, again in close coordination with all stakeholders. The DSOs, of course, will have an important role to play to provide their expertise to the NRS and allow them to make a well-informed decision and to provide an appropriate regulatory framework. A regulatory framework which should facilitate innovation, ensure access of all new actors to the flexibility market, and allows competition on equal footing. It should also promote cost efficiency by taking advantage of the new regulatory options provided by the new technological reality. On the other hand, we know that, and this was mentioned also by Bram, on the other hand, we know that the ESOs have their own private agenda, in particular in terms of cost recovery and to ensure sufficient remuneration, maybe with a possible bias toward traditional grid expansion to increase their asset base. So this is also something that we have to keep in mind. And again, this is why in our views, NRAs who are a bit freer of any political or commercial interest should be in the driving seat, and that NRAs should directly set the distribution tariff methodology, or as a strict minimum approve the methodology proposed by DSOs. This is the case in a majority of member states so far, but we still see a few member states where the NRAs is not involved in the setting of tariff methodology, for instance, in Finland, in Germany, and Sweden. And maybe one last reaction to Elaine's statement. I fully agree with her that the purpose of all this work on network tariff at European level, the main purpose of all this work is to facilitate knowledge sharing and the exchange of best practice among NRAs. And again, I do see here an important role, the need to have a continuous dialogue with Eurelectric and all stakeholders involved in this discussion or impacted by these tariffs.
Thank you, Christoph. And then, well, back to Elaine, actually, to hear your perspective, obviously from the European policymaker, being the European Commission. Having heard that, you said you would like to encourage an active discussion. The ASA report is an important tool on this. The Eurelectric report obviously plays a role here too. But hearing that, I mean, I at least have some fear that, you know, we're still moving to some sort of fragmented debate at member state level. Do you share this concern, or are you rather fine with how it is right now, which is basically the Commission having not a strong grip on, or legislative tool, if you want, to intervene on tariff design? Or am I mistaken here?
So I think that's a tricky question, because we have to bear in mind what the role of the Commission is and what the role of the regulator is. And we need to be respectful of that, and we need to be respectful of the different roles that we have. And then the question at EU level is, where can we add value? How can we improve the situation and improve coordination and have more common approaches than what we have today? And so I think this work is the start of that process. Up until now, this debate hasn't really existed at EU level. And I think this is really the start of the process to really understand what are the best practices, and how within the current legislative framework that we're working in, where can we add value? Where can we support the NRAs? I mean, this is a very complex process, and a lot of them are facing the challenges of electrification, digitalization, innovation, and how do you reflect that in the tariffs? So there's a phrase in English, there's 2 heads are better than 1, but definitely 27 regulators are better than everybody doing it individually. So I'm very happy to see this work coming from Eurelectric, and also very happy to see the ongoing reporting process and the ongoing work as well with Acer. I think this can really contribute, and I think it can really help for us to tackle some of the difficult challenges together.
Excellent. Yeah, I think you're totally right. We started this dialogue now, this debate, in fact, that hasn't existed previously in such a way. So it's good to start somewhere, indeed, of course. Good, Christopher, back to you perhaps to hear again the EV charging perspective. We had now maybe we looked only into public charging options and tariff design problems, but how about public charging versus private and semi-private charging options? Do you see there particular challenges with regards to tariff design that we haven't looked into and which you might want to highlight here?
So very interesting question, Paul. So maybe for context, first of all, actually, when you're looking at charging sessions today, about 70 to 80% of charging sessions actually happen in semi-public and private environments, which means that they are very important in terms of people's uptake of electric vehicles. That's of course going to change as mass market adoption happens and less people have their own private spaces in which to park their car and to charge the car. Typically, what we as an association have not done is to advocate for a specific EV charging tariff in a private setting, because we believe that that tariffs should be market-based and that they should be set in the best interest of the consumer. And a consumer will typically optimize around the building and the dwelling in which the car is parked, and may have solar panels on their roof, or may have taken care of their own electricity production in a certain way that sort of offsets some of the need of using grid-based electricity. I think what's important, though, there is that we need to encourage legislation that gives people a right to the plug, as we call it, which basically means make it easy for you to install, especially in multifamily environments, a charger or a household socket to charge a vehicle, an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid. I think when it comes to semi-public settings, that's typically then linked to, for example, an employer who has an employee fleet of vehicles, company cars that get charged. And there, typically, again, the same thing. We would not advocate for a specific tariff, because that's very difficult to manage within the building and actually increases complexity, but to really go for a market-based mechanism, which we believe in a private and semi-private environment is the best way of dealing with EV charging.
Interesting. No, indeed. So quite some follow-up work to be done to look at this, I think, not only from a national but from a European perspective at all as well. Thanks for these thoughts. Michele, maybe back to you also to on one particular item that you mentioned in your intervention with regards to, well, what you call standardization. Did I understand this correctly, that you would be in favor from the storage industry of a harmonized tariff design for storage facilities across Europe? Is this a correct perception? And if yes, could you elaborate how this could look like?
Well, yeah, maybe let's. It's really, Paul, more a matter of dealing with the complexity, right? So having to do with storage solutions, and most of all with platforms that have to manage, aggregate and manage storage solutions, working in several possible applications and stacking up several revenues. For sure, from the industry perspective, there is a big issue in having to customize and work into different schemes country by country. This is an issue worldwide. So in any country, I gave you the experience that we have in entering new markets, where we have to enter a new market. The tariff scheme is always different, and this is a barrier to entry, because there is a high cost of development in terms of having to manage with the tariff scheme and trying to find a way, especially for the behind-the-meter solutions, to extract value and maximize values for our commercial, industrial, and residential customers. So it is in some way a barrier. It's a matter of complexity. It's a matter of dealing with this complexity. This is a big challenge also for the industry providers, of course, because this is one of the, let's say, main differentiation points on this kind of industries. But it is a barrier. For sure, a standardized tariff throughout broader areas of the continent will help the development for behind-the-meter solutions.
Thanks for this highlighting. Maybe then to Bram now. Bram, you heard Juan's response to your comments on how we treat flexibility solutions and distributed customers, aggregators in the report with regards to tariff solutions. To maybe summarize the gist of it, and also as a response from your side to Juan's feedback, you are calling basically for, this flexibility is fine to assume for customers at the end of the day, because the customer has a storage solution in his house and a solar PV panel and a heat pump, etc. So this complexity is absolutely assumable. Did I get this right? And what would be your response to Juan's feedback on that?
Yeah, I was happy to hear that it is at least not the end of the road, just taking into account static time of use tariffs. Still, I think there is something to be done on enabling the uptake then later on or in the very near future of more dynamic tariffs. Again, as mentioned before, for us, it is then necessary to have access to near real-time data to really see at the moment in time what's happening within a residential household. And therefore, we need some regulation in place that is also facilitating then these more dynamic use cases. To give you an example, most of our residential, let's say, energy retailers, they are transforming from commodity, selling commodity into more energy as a service concept. So heating as a service, EV as a service, and in general, seeing a house is a storage. It's not a single product in a house that is a storage component in view also of the end consumer and also of energy retailers. So preheating a house can be some form of storage instead of doing it at the time that the thermostat maybe was pre-scheduled. The same is with switching of solar panel inverters at a certain amount of time can be seen as sort of a storage management. And all these different systems that are happening behind the meter that do require access to more granular data and also to be able to look behind the meter without connecting every product today, because that's simply not possible. We need solutions. And obviously, I have an interest there as Metrogrid that are available today that allow residential energy retailers and also the aggregators to have a look behind the meter without all the products being connected. And this could be done by indeed sending triggers to end users to either shift big loads, and that's working for some of our customers, or indeed help them to educate what is possible with more connected products that can be controlled remotely and automate things. And I think that's again, also from Smart End perspective and from Metrogrid's perspective, a call to really look into very soon into more dynamic tariff schemes, and that markets also have an opportunity and flexibility to start designing their own dynamic tariff schemes. Because for me, it's essential that market drives the tariff schemes going forward to enable the uptake of energy as a service propositions, where all our residential energy suppliers are looking into today already.
Very interesting. Juan, maybe a response directly from you on this to Bram, maybe directly, and also on the points we heard just before from Christoph and Michele would be interesting. Christopher, about the need to distinguish between public charging and private and semi-private charging points, and that these options basically are calling out for customized tariff design solutions.
Well, certainly we don't think that you can make customized tariff solutions for different uses, because different uses are located behind the meter, and we don't know what is going on behind the meter. So what we need is to define a tariff interface that provides the right economic signal at the meter, and then users will do with it whatever they want. A different thing is that users might choose to give the retailers or their aggregators some control on some of their appliances or the charging points or whatever, and that is a different thing. And then that would depend on the products that are provided by those users. So certainly, what we have seen in our report is that, for instance, time of use tariffs with an efficient time differentiation adapt very well to EV charging at home. They are not designed for EV charging at home. They are designed for giving the right economic signal to all the consumption of the home, but they happen to adapt very well to EV charging at home. When we are looking at something that is isolated from other points of consumption, such as public EV charging, then you can start thinking about the specific tariffs. Some countries have done that. We caution around that in the report, but there you can think of a specific solutions. But whenever you have something that is behind the meter, I fully agree with Christoph that you have to leave the market deliver solutions and provide the best pricing for that.
Thank you. Christopher from Charge Up Europe, any immediate response to that?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with what Juan was saying about the difficulty of distinguishing what's behind the meter. And as I mentioned, we haven't looked at specific tariffs for that reason, because we believe that market-based models are generally in the best interest of the consumer, and that is certainly the right way forward for private and semi-private settings.
So Christoph, from ASA, back to you. You mentioned bundled tariffs as a potential problematic area that, to my knowledge, at least, Juan, please come in here, of course, we did not look into in detail in our report. What do you see there as potential distortions? And another question that I would have, well, is this another, say, balance that we need to strike now in tariff design? Basically, the need to adapt a tariff design quite quickly versus the investment security on which certain network users have done their investment decisions, and reliability of certain tariff design in that sense. So, the times seem to be over that you could look into tariff reforms every 10 years. It needs to be probably done, much more often than that. So is this, do you see there another additional friction point to the balancing, various principles that you have mentioned in your opening statement?
Okay, thank you, Paul. On the first one, the bundle tariff, this is something we have to look into, but as a first reaction, as an immediate reaction, I will be a bit more cautious to give this responsibility to the supplier. But again, this is something that we need to look into a bit more before taking a final view on this issue. Regarding the second point, actually, this issue was raised by Michele, the importance to have to provide stakeholders, in particular storage facilities, with some visibility, with a long-term stability, and this is also something that we emphasize in our report, the importance of tariff stability and predictability, which are key objectives pursued by NRAs when setting this tariff. In our proposal, in our report, we recommended NRAs to set the tariff for multiple years in order to allow appropriate analysis of the possible action to be taken by stakeholders, and allow them to have a bit more predictability. We fully agree with Michele that this is an important element, and we need to ensure the right balance. So in our report, we propose to set the regulatory period for at least 4 years, but within this regulatory period, we could still have some regular update of the tariff values in order to ensure a better cost reflectivity. But this needs to be done on the basis of a predefined methodology in order, again, to preserve this predictability, which is so important to facilitate, to promote investment in this sector.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. Maybe Juan, a quick feedback here, bundled tariffs, and as well what Michele said, investment predictability, and the possible balancing point versus need for adapting tariffs in a much shorter time span that we have experienced in the past.
I am not sure of whether, when you are referring to bundle tariff, you are referring to the Australian example that we present in the report, or in general to the bundle tariff that any retailer can offer their customer, including both the grid tariffs and the energy price. If it is the former, that is a very extreme example that we present in the report with a certain provocative intention, but certainly this has not been proven, and I would probably concur that it is too early to consider something like that. But bundled products at retailer level for each customer are a reality. So retailers are already offering products to their customers that obviously have the grid tariffs implicit in them, but they are not, sometimes they are not visible, sometimes they are not separated, and sometimes the economic signal that is provided by the bundled product is quite different from the grid tariff. And I think that is inevitable if we want to have sufficient competition and innovation in the retailers. Regarding this visibility issue, so certainly I do think that we need to evolve our current grid tariffs. I also think that we need to manage, on the one hand, the complexity and the adaptation of the customers, and on the other hand, the stability that has been mentioned by Michele, for instance. That's why one of the things that we discuss in the report is the possibility of introducing new tariffs as options. Let's say, instead of having the big bang approach that the Spanish regulator has implemented, applying the new tariff to everybody at the same time on the same day, you can create a new tariff, maintain the old tariffs, offer a new tariff to all your customers, give them the possibility to move from the old tariff to the new tariff, introduce some economic incentives that gradually push the customers to move from the old to the new, but with some visibility. So, for instance, a customer that knows that there is a time differentiated tariff on offer, but he or she cannot adapt his or her behavior for the time being, but in the future, when he buys an EV charger, an electric vehicle, or when he buys a heat pump or something like that, might decide to change to the new tariff and might decide to buy the heat pump because he or she knows that more advanced tariff exists. So this possibility of optionality, of having different possibilities, give the let's say, conservative users the possibility to stay where they are, and the more advanced users to move forward. And when moving forward is easier, when retailers and aggregators have developed a number of products that facilitate that moving forward, then all users would be ready to change to the new world, to the new tariff.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and sounds like a pragmatic approach indeed. Maybe in that context, directly a follow-up question to you, Juan. In the context of the current debate we have on high energy prices, a lot of press, of course, on that, and bad press as well, and misunderstandings. You mentioned the Spanish example, some unfortunate, time. There was some timing issues with that. The tariff reform came right in at the same time with high energy costs. Any thoughts on that? What we should look out for here in that regard in this debate?
Well, we have to remember several things. First of all, if we look at the bills of our customers, especially of the domestic customers, the energy cost is a small part of the bill. In many countries, is well below 50%. In some cases, it's even below 30%. So at the end of the day, we have a significant amount of taxes and levies on the bill that are a load for our customers, not only in periods like this of high energy prices, but they are a load every time. So one thing that we need to do is to alleviate that load and to remove those taxes and levies. Certainly, we need better information for the customers. Customers need to understand what is in their bills, need to understand which part of the bill they can control or they cannot control by changing their behavior or adapting their behavior. They need to understand which part of the bill is stable because it's a network cost that is quite stable over the year, and which part of the bill can be more or less volatile because of variations on the energy prices. And we need to be aware of the risks involved in experiments such as the one that has been running in Spain for many years. In Spain, the default regulated tariff that is applied to basically 1/3 of domestic customers is a tariff that includes a direct pass-through of the hourly spot price of electricity. That's something that can make a lot of sense for a sophisticated customer, for an industrial customer, for customers who can optimize their production processor or who can hedge the risks, etc. But situations such as the one that we live right now, show clearly that a domestic customer is not used to that. And a domestic customer shouldn't be worrying about the evolution of the hourly spot price. His or her supplier should be doing that for him or for her, and he should be protected and isolated from that kind of thing. So we need to take that into account. We cannot look at the design of grid tariffs on a standalone basis. We need to look at the design of regulated tariffs in general, including the energy component, and we need to look at the way we provide information to our customers so that they really know what is going on.
Yeah. Thank you very much for these thoughts. That's very interesting. And I think the Spanish case showcases very much the threats and opportunities in policy making and tariff design in that regard. I fear that we are slowly running out of time here in this panel debate, so I will try to wrap up here a bit the main points that we have discussed. Firstly, and really interestingly, good policy making does comprise more than ever information, transparency, stakeholder involvement. We have heard the Spanish case, but I think this applies to, wherever you do tariff reforms, to all member states and to the European level, and goes, of course, beyond also the energy policy sector. So information and transparency is more important than ever in good policy making. And you may have, a very good policy initiative, but if you don't inform and take the stakeholders and public with you, this will be all in vain. We need to keep modernizing and evolving network tariffs to make them fit for the energy transition. This is another takeaway we I think, all agreed on in this debate. They need to be cost reflective as a principle, of course, and together with well-functioning electricity markets, this is a winning solution. This is a no-regret option, so we need to work towards that. However, one-size-fits-all approach is probably impossible to do. So we are still looking at the local specificities and the necessity to take them into account. I think that's clear too. And last but not least, maybe this has not been explicitly confirmed by everybody, but at least there was no disagreement on that. Taxes and levies remain a problem here with regards to tariff reforms. They are a distortive element in the energy sector and need to be very much looked carefully at in this sense. So these for me are the main takeaways. I would like to thank all the panelists here, first of all, very interesting, and thank you for your time and debate here, and the audience for your interest in this debate. As said, you can download the report now on our website, and happy to continue this discussion. I think you can also then find the next events at the Eurelectric website. We have one upcoming on flexibility. We have one upcoming called Digitopia, so please join these as well. And with this, I wish you very much a good day now, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.